being a bookkeeper is fantastic, but if you leverage technology, you can upskill yourself and take yourself to that next level of controllership.
Obviously, AI is a hot button topic right now. How much of this stuff do you see as either being fatty, or is this really something that, do we think it's going to be different this time around?
Well, AI is here to stay.
Do you have any comments about the application of AI to either advisory or compliance services?
These are reasons why we need to be like a first line of defense, right? The first level of triage for our clients.
How are you future-proofing your work? Right? How do you look at going, how do you proactively prepare your firm for what's coming up next?
You have to be willing to embrace change.
Welcome to the CPA Transformation Podcast, where innovation meets insight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Cronin, Chief Strategy Officer at Zenwork. Join me as we consider the forces revolutionizing the world of accountants, bookkeepers, and professional tax preparers. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions and invaluable insights brought to you by tax1099.com. To watch and listen to more episodes of the CPA Transformation Podcast, visit cpatransformation.com, or you can visit our YouTube channel at tax1099. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the CPA Transformation Podcast. My name is Jeff Cronin. I'm with Zenwork, and I'm happy today to have with me Debra. Deb and I actually had luck to meet in person at Digital CPA this year, and we're really happy to have her come today and spend a little bit of time talking about how technology has transformed the landscape for CPA firms over the last few years. So Deb, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Jeff and Zenworks, for having me on the podcast. So my name is Debra, as Jeff shared. I am a consultant with Woodard Consulting, and I actually go into firms and help them build out their client accounting services practice. I was a practitioner for nearly 20 years and have built an incredible client accounting services practice with my former firm, and just super excited to be able to help a ton of firms rather than just one firm.
Great, yeah, and and that we really appreciate you coming on. You've got a lot of experience in transformation of firms, and bringing that experience over to the consulting side to help other people improve their firm experience is really that's a great way to give back to that community as well. Let's start a little bit around talking about integration of new technologies, and I guess maybe we should step back for a second. Ultimately, what are the goals for application of for firm improvement? Why are we doing any of this? Right, we're all out here doing things. We're completing. We've done bookkeeping. We're doing tax. We're doing some audit maybe, or some advisory. What am I trying to do when I go into these programs?
Right. So some of the things that we need to consider is, yes, we're all used to this traditional type of work, whether it's attest services or tax services or bookkeeping. But our profession is evolving, and technology is having a huge influence on that evolution. We now have this whole AI piece of it. We had the machine learning a couple of years ago, and before that we had optical character recognition. And what the technology provides for us is what I call pre-accounting. So instead of calling it bookkeeping, it's getting the transactional work into the system so that we can actually do advisory services, right? And take it to that next level. Instead of just being, and it's not just being a bookkeeper is fantastic, but if you leverage technology, you can upskill yourself and take yourself to that next level of controllership. Why technology? We can do more work in less time and be a lot more efficient, and our clients are serviced much better.
Yeah, so I like that term pre-accounting, right? It sort of separates the mechanical work from the sort of intellectual work that goes along with the accounting process. I think that's a great concept that it's really a good way to think about all of the things that you are looking at doing with either applying outsourcing or automation against. You mentioned AI, and before that machine learning, and before that OCR, right? So for those of us who've been around through this for a while, you went through expert systems, machine learning. The OCR stuff was just an application of that. When you look at that, obviously AI is a hot button topic right now. 2 years ago it was blockchain, right? And so how much of this stuff do you see as either being fatty, or is this really something that, do we think it's going to be different this time around?
Well, AI is here to stay, in my opinion, right? Chat GPT has changed the world by far. I think that it's just going to get faster, more accurate. I mean, we watched Watson play Jeopardy, right? But there was no emotion, right? It won. Watson won, but there wasn't any jumping up and down or cheering or by the computer itself, right? And so, yes, AI is going to continue to be embedded in our day-to-day routines, but we're never going to be taking the human element out of it. We're just going to be able to work more effectively, have more data, and be able to identify issues and correct issues much faster. And that's what it's going to provide for us.
Yeah, you bring an interesting point. But when you look at the history of automation, you've typically seen low skill mechanical jobs automated over time. I think the big thing about the GPT revolution is there are people seeing as opportunities to have knowledge work get automated. Do you have any comments about the application of AI to either advisory or compliance services?
Well, you talk about, I'm sure that the AI CPA is going to, issue different compliance things with these tools as we grow and as we mature, because you can really go on a slippery slope with it, and we're going to have to be cognizant that it is data that's being pulled together for us to leverage, but there still has to be that human eye, that human intervention of reading through and making sure. I think of a test service where there's a going concern, and it could be very strong language for an organization that maybe is just something not huge, but it should be considered when third parties are reading these financial statements. So I think we're going to have to get a balance. I think that our governing bodies are going to have to issue clear, concise regulation around leveraging these tools when it comes to the chat GPTs and AI.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've done, I, of course, because I'm interested in this stuff, actually ask ChatGPT tax questions and see what kind of answers the random person will be getting in terms of those things, right? So I sit down and say, like asking conditions for non-U.S. persons reportable income, right? What do I do? And I'll be honest with you, it's not always right, but it's probably close enough for 80% of the people.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. And ChatGPT always puts a disclaimer. Like I'll throw things in there like, tell me about Zenwork or Tax 1099, and it'll always have a disclaimer. You need to go to their website and make sure things may have changed. I'm pulling this information from historical data and things like that. So it is covering itself with disclaimers for sure.
Yeah, we'll see the return of the Section 230 disclaimer at the just for ChatGPT. We'll create its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. So sorry to the audience if you're not used to the accounting jokes on Section 230. So when you look at how firms can automate, right, can leverage the AI. So we talked a little bit about the fact that it's looking like it can answer some complicated questions. When you talk to folks, I mean, and maybe we're too early for this. When you talk to people about using AI in their practices, what kind of things do you see people looking at commonly?
Well, there's clearly trepidation. By all means. It's new, right? And it's change. It gets people thinking in a different mode. And so I think that that's going to be part of the evolution of adoption. Positive experience.
No, there you go. I mean, it is one of those things that when you look at then how do you apply it to your own practice and where do you use it in ways that, can take some of the drudge work off your staff is really, the kind of thing you look at. I mean, I'll say we at Zenwork implemented an AI chat that actually will even let you complete forms if you're doing a small number of them. It will talk back and forth with you and actually do a narrative process to get you to doing your tax filings, which, for people who are doing 10 forms, as a firm, how is it protect against that?
you know, that's where it pays off for a firm to have, you know, a CTO or CIO that you really have incredible processes in place, that you are making sure that the cybersecurity, you know, that you have those swim lanes, right? And you have guardrails in place, and you follow those protocols. When you're vetting a piece of technology as a firm, having checklists, knowing that, you know, they have multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, that they're making sure that that if you're allowing your clients to use a piece of technology that's in the cloud, that the guardrails are there. And it's your responsibility as a firm. I understand that clients will go out and sign up for all kinds of things, right? It's the nature, and that's where we're in place as the accountant, as the advisor, to help them keep those guardrails up, build those great controls in order to
Yeah.
protect them.
Yeah. If you and you know, there's some. I've seen some chief information security officer as a service offerings, right, where I can actually get a part time or a partial CISO. Have you started to see anybody look at those sort of things? I mean, I guess, I mean, when coming from the technology side, we pay a lot of attention to that kind of stuff because we're a centralization point for a bunch of PII, right? You know, but
Yep.
you know, from a firm level, if you start, you know, for partial CISO services, you know, has anybody started looking at those, you know of?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm in enough firms that, you know, some of these firms are smaller and aren't in a position to hire somebody full time, and they will outsource, right? Right? I mean, that's what we're wanting to do as a CAS leader. We're wanting to outsource for the clients, right? We want to be their whole back office. So we as a firm should be drinking our own champagne. If we're a smaller organization and we don't have the resources to hire somebody full time, then absolutely using. But again, vet them,
Yeah.
make sure you're getting a great product. You know, we have to be able to help protect our clients, right? And build those processes in place. I think of an example that I just learned about a month or so ago, but you know, Intuit's really focused on, you know, transitioning folks to the cloud, and I've been drinking that Kool-Aid for a long time, and and I've always said that it's so much easier for these cyber criminals to hack into our clients' servers because they don't have the resources around their servers, right? And that's why, you know, we leverage, you know, companies like Rightworks, you know, for hosting because they have the tools in place to protect the clients. And this particular client, they were doing their updates with the QuickBooks Desktop, and they got a pop-up message that said, your data is completely corrupt. You need to call this number. And it appeared it came from Intuit. They called the number. They paid the $3,000, and it was a scam. And so, you know, these are reasons why we need to be like a first line of defense, right? The first level of triage for our clients. We, as accountants, as advisors, we look to our vendors to make sure they have their guardrails in place, and then we make sure we, as a firm, have our guardrails in place so that we can teach those best practices to our
I
clients.
think that's a great transition to a conversation around outsourcing, right? So when you look at outsourcing, you brought up the fact that, you know, people usually start thinking about outsourcing as a way to save money, but you know, you actually can improve your offering and, you know, your security standpoint from your security standing from that standpoint. So I guess, you know, a little bit when you think about CPA firms outsourcing, you know, well, one, what should be the reasons you look at it at all? What should be the impetus for starting?
Yeah, so it's tearing down that terror wall, right? So when you start thinking about outsourcing, um, and you're going to go across the pond, right? We look at communities but throughout the globe, right? So you know, you look at India, you can look at the Philippines. There's outsourcing happening in South Africa. There's outsourcing happening in Mexico, and you know, some of the even in Spain and the UK, right? I've seen multiple outsourcing businesses or organizations stood up a lot in the last year or so. And what you have to look at, again, it's a vetting process. I can tell you 8 years ago, 9 years ago, when I was working at the firm, we sent out a survey and asked our clients about outsourcing their work. And hands down, it was no, I don't want my stuff to go offshore. But as we've had resource constraints here in the US, and we've had more conversations with our clients, and we've educated our clients on the advantages of it, that we can, maybe if it's India, that they do the work when we're asleep, and then we get finished work and to review it and to get it over the finish line. And clients are a lot more understanding of the whole outsourcing process if we're communicating it properly. So we need to vet the organization we want to leverage, and we need to be communicating. Those are two key components that will bring down, but you got to bring down that terror wall first of, oh no, I don't, I'm not even considering outsourcing, but yet you're short staffed and you're having a hard time getting deliverables out the door.
Yeah, I think that I personally have had experience outsourcing both in the Americas and working with teams in India or Europe, and I get both your point, right? The getting work done while you're asleep and you come back. What are the communications or coordination challenges if you're time zone displaced like that?
Right. So a couple of things can happen. One is the team, you go to bed at night and you've handed off the work and they have questions and they have to put down the work because they don't know how to proceed, right? Because they have a question, something's come up, and so there's an obstacle, and so they move on to the next project. And so there can be that disconnect, and you're wanting that work, you need it by 9 o'clock the next morning, and they've had to put down pickup kind of thing. So that can lead to some issues within an organization for sure.
Does that change the kind of work or maybe the urgency of the work that you assign to the outsourcing team, or do you look at having diverse, you mentioned Mexico, right? Do I have Mexico and India both so I can assign work depending on time urgency, or what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to prioritize, right? So and to have a really good workflow system in place where the status of the work, when the due dates are, right? Again, here we go. I'm going to go back to technology. Leveraging a tool, right? Leveraging a tool that you can manage your practice with, and you prioritize those things. So if it is very urgent things and you have relationships or you've built partnerships or signed on the dotted line with a couple of outsourcing firms, and then you can do that. And a lot of this is driven on the size of a firm, the number of clients they have, the type of work they're doing, right? So you have to take a lot of things into consideration, but that's not off the table if you have a big priority project, and to have an alternative outsourcing resource.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I've also, we don't want this to happen to your firms. I worked with a firm in the Ukraine prior to the war, and when they got displaced, actually most of them ended up in Spain. But when they got displaced during the war, it was a big disruption. How do you take into when you're selecting partners? Do you actually do you do a geopolitical analysis to figure out if it's in a stable location, or how do I do that?
Well, I think you have to have a disaster relief policy in place, right? Right? Like we require this of our vendors, like if the systems go down, well, who's backing it up, or how are we going to be able to restore it? So, it's sad that we have to think about, what could happen, but if you don't, you're in a really bad place if something does go awry. So building out those processes and procedures around your outsourcing practice, where it's going, who's doing it, when it's being done, and if something were to happen, how do I transition? And really, it's amazing that we've moved so much of our work to the cloud. When COVID hit and I was in practice, right, as a practitioner at the firm, we stood up hundreds of clients in bill overnight because everybody in these businesses that we weren't doing accounts payable for, they had to go home. They couldn't touch tech stock, right? And so we had here we go, back to tech. We had a piece of technology that we could deploy in case of an emergency. And it was of huge benefit.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about what happened during COVID, the number of us who suddenly found ourselves unable to physically go to where our work was being done, that was that shift, the fact that so many services, as you mentioned, were cloud-based. And we've been talking about, I did a stint in travel expense management at a software firm earlier in my career, and we talked for years about when was business travel going to finally die? When was all customer outreach going to be virtually mediated as opposed to being in person? And we haven't quite gotten to all of it, but boy, has a bunch of that gone away. Expense budgets are much lower than they were 10 years ago on a per person basis, and all of that has been, a tech-enabled change, and most of it cloud services.
Sad for me because I love to travel, and I really believe that having that human interaction, at least for initial meetings or deliverable meetings, is so much more impactful. And so, yes, doing Zoom meetings, right, using technology for periodic meetings, and you're 100% spot on that budgets have gone from, here to here, right? I mean, look at firms are saving hundreds of thousands of dollars by decreasing their rental space, right? Because it's not, you're hybrid now, and you can go into an office or you can be 100% remote. It's change. And it's whether we're willing to adopt that change and figure out what's going to be our best avenue forward to be the most successful, is really critical. And then look forward to going to conferences where everybody gets together.
Yeah, a few times a year you get to see people as opposed to seeing them for 3 weeks while you're locked up in an audit. Right. I mean, that, I guess on the upside, you don't have so many people taking a conference room up for 2 months at a time.
Yeah, that's true.
Are there specific things you think that people should look at when they say at a firm, say, hey, I'm considering outsourcing because I want to, what sorts of things are good candidates for that work if I'm just getting on this path myself today?
Yeah, so some of the things I think are absolutely critical is when you're looking at these resources, what are their capabilities? What levels do you need to fill? Where are you going to fit them into the workflow? Quite honestly, when I look at folks that have a college degree, higher education in India, and they become a chartered accountant, which is much more difficult than obtaining your CPA, the way it's been explained to me. Those folks, they don't want to do transactional work. They want to be that advisor. They want to be able to help prep the information that you can deliver those advisory services. They don't want to be doing the pre-accounting, so to speak. And so I think it's important that you understand what your needs are, right? And I'm a firm believer of documenting all of this, right? So you have a process in place, which what I would call a go or no go, and you evaluate what you need, and you look at what resources are available, whether you leverage testing for these folks to put them into the right position, you leverage training, and you can see where these folks are in their journey, in their profession. But it's going to be absolutely critical when you are going to make that shift into outsourcing to really know what your needs are and how somebody can fit into the workflow, how that resource can fit into the workflow. And finding a tool that you can communicate through to let everybody know where that work is and where the status is and what the hangups are. And there's lots of really cool tools out there that can help with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, that's a great, I don't know that you want to endorse any particular tool. I mean, there are a bunch of tools out there. How do you engage in the process of figuring out what to do? How do you pick from all of the tools available?
Yeah, I think of, I don't endorse, I stay system agnostic, but I do like to share tools that I've seen work and work well. I look at Practice Engine, Iris owns them. Their product is really slick because you have time entry, but you have a workflow and they're sitting in the same environment. So it really helps facilitate a very collaborative environment for firms to leverage. It's got to be set up right. You got to understand how it works, right? And so you decide if you want to go down that path. You can look at tools like Financial Sense. They're not as expensive as Practice Engine and using those tools, but Financial Sense does a phenomenal job of building out your workflows, right, inside the system, and you can track time, and it integrates with QuickBooks Online, right? Or you look at tools like Carbon, or you look at Canopy, and I can go through and list multiple ones. So how do you vet them, right? It's going to depend on the size of your organization. It's going to depend on what your budget is for it. It's going to depend on, you need a subject matter expert or a person that raises their hand that wants to be accountable to become that guru for the firm, working with your CTO or the folks in charge of your internal technology within the organization. So it's putting together an appropriate project plan, pros and cons. I remember, when I was a kid and I'd want to go do something and I'd have to sell it to my folks, right? And I'd say what the good things were that was going to come out of it and what the bad things were, right? So you could present, and decide which direction you want to go. And so it's a very thoughtful, detailed process as you begin to choose which piece of technology.
How do you manage training and skill development with outsourced teams, right? I mean, you've got a team in India who's looking to do the not the pre-accounting work, but the preparation of the advisory. How do you make sure they may have passed? They may be a chartered accountant in India. They may not know the AICPA's rules or understand U.S. regulatory frameworks and accounting standards where they're different. How do you do that? How do you accommodate for that?
Well, again, I think it comes from top down, right, from the management team in an organization that you select offshore. What offerings or what trainings have they provided that staff, and then what you have internally or externally outsourced that you can share with them. Some firms, the firm I was with, when it comes to CPE, right? Even if you weren't a CPA, and I'm not a CPA, I still was required to get the same amount of continuing education hours as a credentialed CPA here in the United States. So I had a minimum of 20 hours a year or 120 hours over a 3-year period. And so when we would bring in those outsourcing folks, they would follow the same process, right? That if they're working on the client work and they're the professionals, we would offer that same. So especially when, you're going across the pond and it's offshore, you have to be able to serve Zoom meetings, continuing education that qualify those folks from the U.S. side, right? So you have to be able to build that plan in place in order to make sure that they're following everything. And you can do a lot of internal training, right?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, we'll swing back to tech again for a second, right? The advent of the distance learning materials for CPE has been a huge deal. I mean, back when I first started, I was taking CPE courses on floppy disks, right? Those things that my daughter is surprised to see physical things. There's like, oh, why do you have a physical save icon in your office? But now all that stuff can be done remotely, and it would allow you because again, right, especially if you're dealing with overseas staff, that tech link to teaching can really go a long way to helping make that be more efficient, because they don't want to stay up and come in U.S. hours to go see a U.S. CPE course.
Right. I mean, and that's what vendors do for us, right? They offer, you look at QuickBooks Online, right? If you have a QuickBooks Online accountant, there's, I think, 32 hours of CPE that you can go into the course locker room as a team member and do the certification. Xero offers the same thing, that you can go in and do the certification. So, again, it's building out, I'm a big believer of having a designated person that's responsible for coordinating CPE or trainings, right? That you have a person that really can help design for the career path, what tracks they should be taking to get from an associate. You need to complete these things. To get to a senior, you complete these things. And having a champion or someone that can really coordinate that and make sure that everybody's getting that training so that they can elevate themselves in their career to the next position. I think that can be very effective for an organization. And again, you can outsource that too, right? As a firm, if you're small and you don't have the resources, you look to some of these organizations. Even Woodard, we do tons of training to help folks build that ideal practice, right? And so you really want to document it. You're going to hear these consistent words, and make sure it's work, right? None of this happens overnight. You prioritize and then you deploy. And before you deploy to 100% of your clients, you pilot and you test it and you poke holes in it to make sure that before you take it from 4 to 100, that you know what the next steps are if something goes wrong.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. So when you talk about those transitions, how does that training and that, how are you future proofing your work, right? How do you look at going, how do you proactively prepare your firm for what's coming up next? Do you have any thoughts about, as technology advances, as the expectations of firms, and what even what the firms desire for their own futures? Like, how do you think about the future in that way?
Yeah, it's education. Like I said earlier, I'm a big fan of traveling and conferences,
Yeah.
but I will tell you that I built a good majority of my career on attending these vendor floors, main stages, and breakout sessions to look at those people that are thought leaders, that are innovators, that can really kind of be that first horse out of the starting gate, and offer. So I just believe that, like, if I were in a firm still today, before I would attend anything, I would go and I would cherry pick 4 to 6 clients that had issues. And I would walk that vendor floor to see if I could resolve some of those issues. So being proactive, I could see a problem with the client. The client may or may not know it, but I could come back and say, I've identified this problem that you have, and I believe we can solve it with this piece of technology. Let's get on a call and look at it together. So that's how you can be proactive. You stay up. Social media is good and bad, right? It's overwhelming, a lot of information, but it is a lot of information. But if you can read and watch podcasts and listen to the thought leaders and be willing to change and adapt, you can be very proactive in your firm or organization and to be successful and to be some of those first adopters, right, of a certain piece of technology, because then you can be a champion and you can influence a piece of technology to make changes for improvements for the broader audience if you're an early adopter. So it's a mindset. You have to be willing to embrace change.
And I think that's a really important sort of theme overall on the technology side, right? The application, we talked very briefly about, we went from OCR to blockchain to AI, and those things, there will none of those things actually went away, right? Right, blockchain isn't getting as much press as it is, but frankly, it's still there. It's still people are still leveraging it, and as things progress, you have to sort of figure out when the hype dies and normalizes. What are you doing with it on an ongoing basis? And so thank you, because being cognizant of what's going on and to your point, attending events is a great way to see what future items and what vendors are saying. And as a vendor, I'll say half the stuff people hype probably never happens, but the half that does happen, it's great to have known about it before it became a necessity to get there in the ground floor. Yeah. So, a little bit on client communications, right? So we talked about the fact that we're doing pre-accounting with with one set of staff, we've started to do pre-advisory work or advisory work offshore on an outsourced basis. How do you deal with client communication in that situation, right? Does that advisory work that you've done in India, do you as the firm in the U.S. present the material entirely? Do those people participate? How do you think about that?
No, I think it can be a combination depending on who's on the team. I believe I like to use the acronym of client relationship manager, CRM. I know we use it for customer, but having that quarterback, somebody that is ultimately responsible to coordinate, right? And to be doing the play calling. And, partners within a firm have lots of clients, but they're not down into the weeds. So you could have a partner as part of the team, but it's typically, that director or manager that's really supervising the entire client engagement that will coordinate that. And then you can have a combination of folks attend those deliverables, whether it's in Zoom or whether it's, in person. But if you back up a second, client communication needs to be standardized, and it's whether the firm has a portal where you're sharing documentation, whether you're using Google, whether you're using a product like Lisio or Carbon, any of those that you can be interactive with a client and be able to store that data. We are all overwhelmed with Outlook and emails. Like at Woodard we have a zero tolerance policy. You don't keep anything in your inbox. You do it, you delegate it, or you delete it, right? You get, because it's noise. It's noise, and it sits there, and it can actually slow you down. It could cause you to run into brick walls because you're overwhelmed at all of this information coming at you. So having a place, whether you're using these tools where you can actually like Financial Sense even has that portal where every client communication will float down in there, where the team as a whole can go review anything that happened within that client and any correspondence. You can't work disparately, and you cannot work in silos. And I've done a couple of webinars on bridging the gap between CAS and tax, because they go together like peanut butter and jelly. You got to take them through the life cycle, and tax needs to know where CAS is, and CAS needs to know where tax. It's a mutual. So you got to break down those silos. You got to have a central location where you can see the communication so that you can be extremely collaborative. It's an incredible client journey, and the client sees a huge value in it. That's how you're going to keep these clients satisfied and sticky within your organization.
Yeah, you sort of, you didn't say it, but you said, apply technology to client communication.
We're going to go back to the beginning of the conversation. And the tech is out there, right? You can be using Teams within your organization for that communication, right? You can have folders in Teams. There's lots of tools out there. Using your true CRMs like HubSpot and Salesforce and Oracle products, whatever it is, right? You decide what you're going to adopt, and you standardize it, and you have guardrails around it, because you have to have good naming conventions, and you have to understand what that process is. So it all falls back to documentation and having, I say guardrails. I hate using the word rules. Right? It makes you feel like a little kid again. You got rules on the playground. You're not, no, this is guardrails. These are things put in place to benefit an organization.
Yeah, to just sort of keep everybody in the lines a little bit, but they're more, it's not so much a law as it is a recommendation, right? You should think about these things, but ignore them if it's the appropriate way to go forward. Sometimes you have to go past the guardrails, so then you don't really want to use the word right back, right? Sometimes you have to break the rules a little bit to do the right thing for yourself, your firm, and your customer. So,
and then you go back and redocument and change the process and be innovative.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one last thing. You mentioned going to events and shows. So, is there anything that you would recommend that we all look for as sort of that what's on the horizon for us in the accounting industry?
I think about AI CPA Engage. That's a great event that's put on. I think about the Sage Summit they have if you're an in-tax specialist. I think about Digital CPA, CPA.com puts that on in the late fall every year. I think about QuickBooks Connect that Intuit puts on, that's totally QuickBooks centric. I think of Zero. Zero's coming back here to the US. They'll be in Nashville. I believe it's in August. If Yeah, if these firms are very focused on zero, but I'm a little bit partial. I work for Woodard, and Scaling New Heights, as far as I'm concerned, is probably the premier accounting show, or is the premier accounting show. We're going to have hundreds of tracks. I believe there's over 30 CPEs offered, and probably the best vendor floor that I've been on. I've attended Scaling New Heights, I believe, for 15 years. So, a little plug for Scaling New Heights in June.
You absolutely should. I mean, we'll be there. So,
Yes.
so Zenwork will be on the floor at Scaling New Heights as well as Zero actually in
Awesome.
Nashville. So,
Awesome.
yeah, I think I think that's a great list of things. If you can make space for it, for all of our listeners out there, I can't agree with Deb more. I was probably in the Aria in Las Vegas too many times last year.
Me four.
But exactly, I think I was only three, but Ed, who works with me here at Zenwork, was I think 6 times in the Aria last year. And although you may get tired of going to the same locations over and over again, it is just a great opportunity to see what's going on the floor, to actually meet folks like Deb, who like I mentioned, we met at Digital CPA this year, and connect with folks in the industry who you can really get an opportunity to learn for what's going on. I personally find those events as useful for networking and for getting referrals for other information. I'll get some ideas on the floor, but if I can find somebody who's actually using that thing, it's 100 times more useful for me. So, absolutely go to Scaling New Heights. I agree. That's definitely an event to head to.
Yeah, it's at the largest Marriott property in Orlando. So, and I'm a Marriott fan, and that's why I'm thrilled the Aria is now a Marriott as well. So, give a little plug to Marriott.
Yes. Yeah, all the MGM properties are now on Bonvoy,
Yep.
right?
That's right.
So, well, Deb, thank you so much for the time. It's been great. And I'll definitely see you in Orlando, maybe before then.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thanks for the time, Jeff, and appreciate the opportunity.